In the quiet countryside of medieval France, in a small village called Domremy, a young girl named Joan spent her days tending sheep, gathering firewood, and watching the world with gentle curiosity. She was born into a time of fear and hardship, a time when war had torn France apart for nearly 100 years. English armies marched across the land, villages burned, hunger spread, and people whispered prayers that felt too small to fight such darkness. But Domremy remained peaceful, as if protected by some unseen grace. Wildflowers bloomed across the fields, willow trees went softly over the streams, and birdsong filled the air each morning. Joan loved this place deeply. She loved the rhythm of village life, the ringing of church bells, the glow of sunsets on the hills, the warm smell of bread from her mother's kitchen. She was only a child, yet there was something different about her. She was thoughtful, quiet, always watching, always listening. Her eyes carried a softness, but also a spark, like a flame waiting to be awakened. Sometimes, while tending the sheep alone, she would kneel in the tall grass and whisper prayers into the wind. She prayed for peace. She prayed for France. She prayed for the suffering of people she had never met. Even at a young age, she felt connected to something larger than herself. One afternoon, when Joan was around 13, she stood in the orchard behind her house, gathering fallen apples into a basket. The sunlight streamed through the clouds in soft golden beams. The air smelled of earth and sweet fruit. It was a moment of perfect quiet. Then suddenly, the wind rustled through the trees in a strange, swirling motion, different from any wind she had known. The leaves shimmered with a silver glow. The world seemed to pause as if holding its breath. Joan stood still, her heart beating slowly, deeply. Then she heard it. A voice, gentle but powerful, as clear as if someone stood beside her. "Joan, daughter of God." She gasped softly and looked around, but no one was there. The voice came again, filled with warmth and light. "France is in great suffering. A mission awaits you." Joan dropped her basket. Apples fell and rolled across the grass. Her hands trembled. Who speaks to me?" she whispered. The air shimmered. A soft glow formed in the orchard, and in that glow she sensed the presence of something holy, something she could not see but could feel in every heartbeat. "Fear not," the voice said. "You are chosen." Joan fell to her knees, overwhelmed by awe and confusion. She was a simple girl. She could not read or write. She knew nothing of war or politics. She had only her faith and her courage. "I am only Joan," she whispered. "I do not understand." "You will," the voice replied. "Be brave. Be strong. France depends on you." Then the glow faded. The wind softened. The orchard returned to silence. Joan remained kneeling, her hands pressed to her chest. She felt a warmth spreading through her body, an unfamiliar but comforting strength. But she also felt fear. Why her? Why speak to her? How could a village girl help a broken nation? For days she kept the experience to herself. She went about her chores quietly, though her mind churned with questions. Were these visions real? Was she truly chosen? Or was it her imagination? But the voice returned, again and again, always gentle, always filled with light. "Joan, France needs you." Each time the voice came, she felt her fear diminish and her resolve grow. The visions became clearer. She saw a man wearing a crown. She saw soldiers lifting banners. She saw flames. She saw victory. She saw pain. She saw herself standing before armies, small but unafraid. One evening, as she sat beside the fire with her family, her father noticed the faraway look in her eyes. "Joan," he said, You have been quiet lately. What troubles you?" Joan hesitated. She looked at her mother, then at her father. Her voice trembled. "I have heard something." Her father frowned. "What do you mean?" Joan took a deep breath. Voices, holy voices. Her father stiffened. Her mother's hands stopped moving. The room fell silent. "Voices?" Her father repeated slowly. "What sort of voices?" "Voices from God," Joan said softly. "Voices telling me that France needs me." Her father's face darkened. "Joan, do not speak such things. People are punished for claims like that." "I am not lying," she said. "I would never lie about God." Her mother studied her gently. "What do these voices say?" "That I must go to the Dauphin," Joan answered. "I must help him reclaim France." Her mother gasped. The Dauphin, the rightful heir to the French throne, lived far away, hidden, uncertain, struggling to save his kingdom. For Joan to even speak of him was dangerous. "You are a child," her father said firmly. "This is not your burden." But Joan met his gaze with quiet determination. "It is my burden. God has chosen me." Her father rose angrily. "Enough! These are illusions. You will forget them." But Joan could not forget. The voices did not fade. Each message grew stronger. "Go to the Dauphin. Save France. You are called." The weight of the mission settled into her heart, turning from fear into purpose. She knew she could not disobey. She knew this was not a dream. She knew her life had changed forever. In the weeks that followed, Joan grew more determined. She helped around the village as always, but her gaze often drifted toward the distant horizon. She imagined the Dauphin waiting, unaware that a girl from Domremy would soon walk into his life and change everything. One night, she knelt in the small village church, the candles flickering around her. Her voice trembled as she prayed. "God, I am young. I am small. I do not know how to lead, but if you choose me, I will not turn away." She pressed her forehead to the cold stone floor. "I am yours. Send me where you wish." A soft warmth filled the church, a presence she had begun to know well. "Rise, Joan," the voice whispered. "The time is near." Joan opened her eyes. Tears shimmered but did not fall. She knew then, with absolute certainty, that she would leave Domremy. She would walk roads she had never seen, face armies she had never imagined, stand before kings, and step into a war far greater than her village could ever comprehend. A 17-year-old girl would soon become the commander of men. A child would soon become the symbol of hope. A voice from heaven would soon carry her into destiny. And though she did not know it yet, her journey would lead not only to triumph, but to sacrifice. Winter lingered over Domremy, wrapping the village in cold winds and quiet mornings. Smoke drifted from chimneys, and the fields lay bare under soft gray skies. Joan walked among the empty trees, her breath rising like mist. The voices had grown more urgent, more insistent, and her heart felt heavier each day. She knew she could not stay in her village much longer. The call was pulling her, drawing her toward a destiny she barely understood. But leaving was not simple. A girl could not travel alone. A peasant could not speak with nobles. A child could not meet a future king. Every path forward seemed impossible. Yet the voice told her to go, and she believed. One afternoon, Joan approached a neighbor named Durand Laxart, a kind man who often helped her family. She stood before him, nervously, holding her hands tightly together. "Durand," she said softly, "I must go to Vaucouleurs." He looked at her. confused. Why Vaucouleurs? That is many miles away. To speak to the captain there, Joan replied. He will help me reach the Dauphin. Durand stared at her, trying to read her expression. Joan, you are only a girl. What business do you have with the Dauphin? She swallowed, then lifted her chin with quiet strength. God commands me. Durand's eyes widened. He had heard rumors around the village, whispers that Joan had visions, that she spoke of angels and missions. Some thought her gifted, others thought her strange. But looking into her eyes now, Durand saw something he could not explain. A fire, a certainty, a truth that did not tremble. You truly believe this? He asked. Yes, Joan whispered, with all my heart. Durand hesitated, then he nodded slowly. I will take you. The journey to Vaucouleurs was long and cold. Snow fell gently on the road, covering the fields in white. Joan walked beside Durand's horse, her boots sinking into the wet earth. She felt afraid sometimes, afraid of thieves, of wolves, of failure. But each time fear rose, a steady voice inside her whispered, You are not alone. Villagers along the path stared at her, surprised to see such a young girl traveling with purpose. Some smiled kindly, others shook in their heads, thinking she was foolish. But Joan kept walking, her eyes fixed forward, her heart filled with quiet determination. When they reached Vaucouleurs, they went directly to the castle of Captain Robert de Baudricourt, a stern military leader known for his sharp mind and little patience. Joan waited in the courtyard as soldiers passed by, giving her puzzled looks. She was a simple peasant girl, dressed in rough wool, her hair covered by a plain scarf. When Baudricourt finally appeared, he frowned at her. What is this child doing here? Joan stepped forward bravely. My name is Joan. God sends me to you so you may send me to the Dauphin. I must help him save France. Baudricourt blinked in disbelief. Then he burst into sudden, loud laughter. Save France? He repeated. You? Yes, Joan said calmly. You are just a girl, Baudricourt scoffed. France needs soldiers, not children. Joan met his gaze without fear. I will lead soldiers if God wills it. The captain stared at her, confused and irritated. Go home. Your family needs you. France does not. But Joan shook her head. I cannot go home. God commands me to go to the Dauphin. Baudricourt waved his hand dismissively. Nonsense. Leave before I lose my patience. Durand placed a hand on Joan's shoulder and gently guided her away. Outside the castle gates, Joan stood still, her breath visible in the cold air. She felt disappointment, but not defeat. Will you return home? Durand asked softly. No, Joan said, her voice steady. I will stay until he believes me. And she did. For several days she remained in Vaucouleurs. She slept in barns, prayed in the small church, and spoke gently to anyone who would listen. People began to whisper about her courage. Some said she was strange. Others said she was blessed. A few believed she might truly be sent by God. One woman, who met Joan, said, There is something in her eyes, something I cannot explain. The town slowly turned its attention toward her. Even soldiers began to speak of the girl who claimed she could save France. They knew their country was suffering. Villages burned, cities lost, armies defeated. Hope was rare, and hope, even in the shape of a young girl, was something they needed. When Baudricourt heard the rumors spreading, he grew uneasy. A soldier approached him and said, Captain, the girl speaks with such faith. Perhaps we should hear her again. Baudricourt frowned. You think France will be saved by a child? Perhaps God works in strange ways, the soldier replied quietly. The words lingered in Baudricourt's mind, and when a messenger arrived with news of another French defeat, something inside him shifted. A desperation softened his pride. The next morning, he summoned Joan. She entered the stone chamber calmly, her hands clasped. Baudricourt looked at her with a grave expression. "Tell me again, girl, why must you go to the Dauphin?" Joan inhaled softly. "Because God commands me to lead France to victory. He has chosen me to lift the siege of Orléans and to guide the Dauphin to his rightful crown." Her voice did not waver, not once. Baudricourt narrowed his eyes. "If I send you, and you are wrong, you will die." Joan nodded. "If I do not go, France will die." A long silence filled the chamber. Baudricourt leaned back, studying her. She did not tremble. She did not blink. She stood like someone who had already accepted whatever fate waited for her. Finally, he sighed deeply. "Very well. I will give you an escort." Joan bowed her head. "Thank you, Captain." He rubbed his forehead. "But one condition." She looked up. "You must dress as a soldier. The roads are dangerous. You cannot travel as a girl." Joan hesitated for only a moment. It was not a sin, she thought, if God willed it to protect her mission. "I will do as you say." Baudricourt nodded toward a corner of the room where a soldier placed a folded set of dark clothing, pants, boots, and a tunic. Joan carried them quietly to a small room. When she returned minutes later, dressed in soldier's clothes, a hush fell over the room. She looked taller, stronger, almost transformed. Her long hair was hidden under a black cap. Her eyes shone with determination. She was no longer just Joan of Domremy. She was a warrior of purpose. As she stepped forward, the sound of her boots striking the stone floor echoed through the hall. A soldier whispered, "She looks ready." Another murmured, "Perhaps she truly is chosen." Baudricourt walked toward her, his face serious. "I will send a message to the Dauphin. You will have several men to escort you. But Joan, if he refuses to see you, you must return home." Joan nodded slowly. "He will see me." "How can you be certain?" he asked. "God has told me," she said simply. Later that night, in a small chamber lit by candlelight, Joan knelt on the floor and whispered her prayers. She felt fear, yes, but she also felt strength. Far stronger than fear. The voices were quiet now, but their message was clear. Go, do not doubt. When morning came, Joan mounted a horse for the first time in her life. Soldiers adjusted her saddle, gave her a short sword for protection, and handed her a banner she had chosen, white, decorated with symbols of God and angels. As she gripped the reins, her heart beat faster. She was about to leave everything she had ever known, her home, her family, her childhood. Durand approached her and placed a hand on her arm. "May God protect you, Joan." "God is with France," she replied gently. Then she gave a command the soldiers never expected from a young girl. "Forward." The horses began to move. Snow crunched under their hooves. The cold wind brushed against Joan's cheeks. The road ahead looked endless, but she did not look back, not once. She left Domremy behind her forever, and in that moment, a new chapter of history began. For a 17-year-old girl was riding toward the Dauphin, toward an army waiting for hope, toward a destiny written not in ink but in fire. The winter roads toward Chinon stretched endlessly before Joan and her small escort. The men riding with her were seasoned soldiers, strong and experienced. Yet they found themselves looking at the young girl often, trying to understand this strange, quiet force she carried. She rode with surprising ease for someone who had barely ridden before. Her back was straight, her eyes fixed ahead, her banner held firmly in her hand. Some nights the soldiers whispered among themselves while Joan slept near the fire. "Do you think she's truly sent by God?" one man asked. Another shrugged. "I don't know, but she rides like someone who fears nothing. Children fear everything." "She's not a child," the second man murmured. "Not anymore." The journey was dangerous. They rode through forests where bandits hid, through villages where English patrols might appear at any moment, across rivers half frozen with ice. But each time danger approached, Joan somehow sensed it before the others did. Once she stopped suddenly and told the men to take a different path. Hours later, they learned that English soldiers had been waiting on the original road. Another time, she warned them of a broken bridge ahead long before it was visible. Her certainty saved their lives. The men began to trust her, not because she demanded it, but because she inspired it. Her calmness in the face of fear softened their own doubts. Her prayers at night brought them a peace they had forgotten. Her voice, soft but unwavering, carried a weight they could not explain. After 11 long days of travel, they finally reached Chinon, a grand fortress rising above the river, full of soldiers, nobles, and royal guards. The Dauphin Charles waited inside, surrounded by advisors who questioned every decision. France was falling apart. He had little power, little money, and even less hope. When Joan arrived outside the castle, the guards looked at her with disbelief. "This girl wants to see the Dauphin?" one guard said, laughing. Joan dismounted, her boots touching the cold stone ground. "Yes," she said simply. "God commands it." Her escort stepped forward. Captain Baudricourt sent her with his approval. The guards exchanged glances. No one sent letters lightly in times of war. After a moment they nodded and allowed her to enter the great hall. The room was lit by torches, shadows dancing along the high stone walls. Nobles stood in clusters, speaking in hushed voices. Soldiers watched carefully, their hands on their swords. But Joan kept walking, her eyes steady, her steps quiet but purposeful. She expected to see the Dauphin seated on his throne, but the hall held many richly dressed men. The Dauphin had decided to test her. He had hidden among his courtiers, wearing no crown, no special robe. He wanted to see if she could truly recognize him. Joan paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. The nobles watched her with curiosity mixed with amusement. How could a peasant girl possibly find the Dauphin among them? Joan took a deep breath. Then, without hesitation, she turned to a man standing halfway back in the hall, plainly dressed, pretending to be an ordinary court member, and walked directly toward him. She bowed gently. "My king," she said. A gasp swept through the room. The real Dauphin stared at her, stunned. She had found him effortlessly, without being told, without any signal. How did you know?" he whispered. Joan lifted her eyes. "God guided me." The hall fell silent. Even those who doubted her felt a strange shiver. Charles, uncertain but intrigued, motioned her to stand. "Rise, Joan. Tell me why you have come." Joan rose slowly. "I am sent by God to help you. I will raise the siege of Orléans. I will lead your armies to victory, and you will be crowned king." Whispers rushed through the room. Some nobles laughed softly. Others frowned. A peasant girl telling the future? claiming she could lead armies? It sounded impossible. But the Dauphin did not laugh. He looked deeply into her eyes. There was something there, something he could not ignore, something honest, something powerful. Still, he had doubts. He leaned back in his chair. Joan, France is weak. My armies are broken. I am not even sure I can claim the throne. Why did God not choose someone stronger? Joan stepped closer. He chooses the weak to show his power. Her voice trembled slightly, but her gaze did not. Charles felt something stir inside him, an emotion he had not felt in years, hope, but his advisors were quick to intervene. "Sire, you cannot trust this girl," one whispered urgently. "She could be mad." "She speaks nonsense," another insisted. "She is dangerous," a third warned. "What if she is sent to trick you?" Charles raised his hand, silencing them. "We will test her." And they did. For days, Joan was questioned by theologians, priests, scholars, and commanders. They asked her about her visions, her mission, her signs. They tried to confuse her, trap her, test her knowledge, but Joan answered every question with simple, humble confidence. "I know nothing but what God has told me," she repeated. She never contradicted herself. She never hesitated. Her purity disarmed them. Her conviction silenced them. After days of questioning, the priests whispered among themselves, "She speaks with innocence. She speaks truthfully. She shows no sign of deception. She may indeed be chosen." And so, reluctantly, they agreed to let Joan continue. The Dauphin summoned her again to his chamber. He looked tired, worn down by war and doubt. But when Joan entered, something brightened in his expression. "Joan," he said softly, "France needs a miracle. Can you truly lead my armies?" Joan bowed her head. "Not I, sire. God will lead them. I am only his servant." Charles exhaled slowly. "Then I will give you armor, a horse, a sword, and men to command." Joan lifted her eyes, shining with determination. "Then France will rise." Charles studied her for a long moment. "Why do you have such faith?" Joan smiled softly. "Because God has faith in you." Those words struck him deeply. No one, not nobles, not generals, not even his own family, had ever spoken to him with such conviction. "Very well," he whispered. "You will go to Orléans." As arrangements were made, the castle buzzed with excitement. Some soldiers scoffed. "A girl leading us? Absurd." Others shrugged. "Maybe we have nothing to lose." But some, just a few, felt something shift in their chests. They had seen her calm presence, heard her unwavering words. They began to believe. Joan was given armor, though it felt heavy at first. She trained with the soldiers, learning to ride with full equipment, to hold a sword firmly, to endure the weight of leadership. The men watched her in amazement as she pushed herself harder each day. One soldier whispered, "She works harder than all of us." Another replied, "Because she carries more than all of us." When her horse was finally prepared, a magnificent white horse, the stable master brought it forward. Joan approached it slowly, resting a gentle hand on its neck. "You will carry me into God's battle," she whispered. The horse bowed its head slightly, as if it understood. As the army prepared to march, Joan requested one final thing, a banner, not for pride, but for purpose. "It must carry the names of Jesus and Mary," she said. "It will be my strength." When the banner was finished, she held it high. The white fabric fluttered in the wind, painted with lilies and sacred words. Soldiers stopped to stare. Something about the banner moved them deeply, its purity, its boldness, its promise. A young boy near the stable whispered, "She looks like a saint." A soldier murmured, "No, she looks like hope." On the morning of departure, Joan mounted her horse. The sunlight struck the white banner, making it glow. Soldiers gathered around her, quiet and uncertain, waiting for orders. Joan looked over them, her heart swelling with purpose and fear and faith. She raised the banner high. "In God's name," she said softly, "we go to Orléans." A wind swept through the camp, lifting the banner, brushing against armor, rustling cloaks. Men straightened their backs, eyes sharpened, hearts stirred. For the first time in years, an army felt alive again. Joan turned her horse toward the road. The soldiers followed. Hooves thundered, swords glimmered, the banner shone. And as they rode, the people of the villages they passed gathered along the roadsides. Mothers cried, fathers bowed, children waved tiny flags. Some reached out to touch Joan's armor as she passed. "She is chosen," they whispered. "She is our miracle. She is the girl sent by God." Joan felt tears rise, but she held them back. She could not show weakness now. Ahead of her stood Orléans, a city under siege, surrounded by English armies on the edge of collapse. Ahead of her stood battle. Ahead of her stood destiny. And behind her, for the first time in 100 years, France began to believe again. The city of Orléans lay wounded beneath a gray sky, its walls scarred, its towers cracked from months of bombardment. Smoke drifted above the rooftops, like a dark cloud refusing to leave. Outside the city, English camps circled the walls like hungry wolves. Soldiers guarded every path, every bridge, every corner of land. The French inside Orléans had grown desperate, tired, and starved of hope, but hope was riding toward them. Joan's army approached the city at sunset, their armor glinting faintly under the fading light. The wind carried the sound of hooves and the soft flutter of her white banner. As she rode at the front, Joan felt the air thicken with tension. She could hear distant cannon fire. She could sense the fear inside the walls, but she did not slow. She did not look away. God had sent her here. When the people of Orléans first saw her army approaching, they rushed to the ramparts, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had heard rumors of a young girl coming to save them, a girl chosen by heaven. But rumors meant little in war. They had seen cities burn, armies fall, kings break their promises. Still, something about the sight before them stirred their weary hearts. A young girl in armor, riding a white horse, holding a banner that glowed like a divine flame. "Is that her?" a woman whispered. "It must be," a man replied, his voice trembling. "The maid." Torches lit up along the city walls as Joan drew closer. The gates opened slowly, creaking under their own weight. Soldiers and civilians gathered, forming a path for her army. Joan rode inside, and for a moment the entire city seemed to hold its breath. She dismounted and stepped forward, her armor catching the firelight. The people stared, expecting perhaps a warrior with a booming voice or a noblewoman with jewels and a crown. Instead, they saw a teenager with gentle eyes and a soft face, yet those eyes held a strength more powerful than swords. A commander approached her, bowing slightly. "Maid Joan, we feared you would never reach us. The English watch every road." Joan smiled faintly. "God cleared the roads for us." Her confidence startled him. "The men, they are tired. They have lost many battles." Joan touched his arm gently. "Then tonight they will find new courage." The people leaned closer, listening to every word. Joan turned slowly, looking at the faces around her, soldiers with unshaven beards, mothers holding children, elders clutching rosaries. She saw their fear, their hunger, their exhaustion, and she felt something rise inside her, an overwhelming love, fierce and protective. "Good people of Orléans," she said, her voice soft but strong, "do not be afraid." Her words echoed against the stone walls. "God has sent me to you. You will not fall. You will not die. You will be free." A murmur spread through the crowd, soft at first, then growing. Is she truly sent by God? She speaks with such fire. She is our miracle. She has come. The soldiers straightened their backs, their eyes sharpened. They felt something they had not felt in many months: belief. Joan spent the night walking through the city with her banner. She visited the wounded in narrow rooms filled with the smell of herbs. She comforted children sleeping beside cold hearths. She prayed in the darkened church where candles flickered like trembling stars. Soldiers followed her silently, moved by her presence. She did not boast. She did not issue threats. She simply listened, prayed, and spoke with such humility that hardened men felt their hearts soften. Near midnight, she gathered the commanders in a small room lit by torches. Maps lay scattered across a wooden table, lines, arrows, markings of danger. "We will attack tomorrow," she said. The commanders exchanged shocked looks. "Tomorrow?" one asked. "At dawn, that is madness. The English are strong. Their fortifications are too high. Our men are too few." "It cannot be done," another muttered. Joan stepped closer to the table. "It must be done." "But how?" they insisted. "Fight," she said simply. "Fight with courage. Fight with God's strength." The commanders hesitated, torn between doubt and the strange certainty radiating from the young girl. "We will succeed," Joan whispered, "because God does not lie." Her words silenced the room. At dawn, the air was cold and sharp. Mist curled over the fields. The English campfires burned low in the distance. Their soldiers marched lazily, unprepared for what was to come. Joan mounted her white horse, her armor shining faintly in the pale light. She lifted her banner high. The wind lifted it gently, as if heaven itself wished to make it visible. The French soldiers gathered behind her, gripping their spears and swords. Their breaths formed clouds. Their hearts beat fast. One young soldier approached Joan nervously. "Lady, I fear I may die today." Joan leaned down from her horse and touched his cheek softly. "Do not fear death," she said. "Fear only failing to do what is right." The boy swallowed hard but nodded. Her words felt like a warm shield around his heart. The drums began to beat, slow, steady, powerful. Joan turned her horse toward the battlefield. "In God's name," she said, "charge." The army surged forward. Shouts filled the air. Hooves thundered. Banners whipped in the wind. The French ran with a force they had forgotten they possessed. At the front of them all was Joan, her white banner blazing like fire, her horse galloping through the mist. The English soldiers froze in confusion. "A girl?" one shouted. "What madness is this?" "No, look at the men behind her. They are fighting again. They have hope." The English tried to regroup, but the French were unstoppable. The sight of Joan filled them with a fierce courage that could not be measured. They stormed the English outposts, climbed ladders, fought their way across wooden bridges, and pushed forward relentlessly. Arrows rained from the sky. Joan's banner fluttered above them, refusing to fall. She shouted orders with a voice that rose above the battle. "Forward! Do not fear! God is with us!" Men fought with renewed strength, as if her voice filled their lungs with fire. The English grew terrified. For years they had crushed French armies easily, but now the French fought like lions, driven by something they could not understand. Throughout the day, Joan rode along the lines, encouraging men, lifting fallen banners, carrying messages where others would not dare to ride. Even when arrows flew past her, she did not slow. Soldiers said they saw a light around her, as if heaven protected her. But near evening, while leading an attack near one of the city's fortifications, Joan was struck by an arrow. The sharp cry that escaped her lips echoed across the battlefield. Soldiers gasped. Some froze. The English cheered. "She is wounded. The witch is fallen. France will break now." French morale wavered. Some soldiers began to retreat, but Joan, trembling with pain, did not allow it. She pulled the arrow out with her own hands, tears filling her eyes, blood soaking her sleeve. A priest ran to her, but she shook her head. "I am not finished," she said. She climbed to her feet, slowly, gripping her banner. Her voice broke, but did not fall silent. "Do not retreat," she cried. "Do not lose heart." Soldiers stared at her, stunned by her strength. She lifted her banner high again, though her arm shook. The fabric unfurled, shining in the evening light. "Forward!" she shouted. The French turned back. Their courage returned. They roared and charged again with a fury that startled even themselves. By nightfall, after hours of relentless fighting, the English positions collapsed. Their lines broke. They retreated in panic, and Orléans was saved. The bells rang throughout the city, loud, joyful, unstoppable. People flooded the streets, crying, laughing, embracing. Soldiers lifted Joan from her horse and carried her through the city gates. "The Maid has delivered us. God has sent a miracle. Orléans is free." Joan, exhausted and trembling, felt tears fall down her cheeks, not tears of pain, but of overwhelming gratitude. She whispered softly, "Thank you, God." That night, as candles lit every window in Orléans, Joan sat quietly in a small room overlooking the river. Her armor lay beside her, scratched and stained. Her banner rested gently against the wall. She looked at her trembling hands, still stained with blood. She felt the bruise beneath her armor where the arrow had struck. She was 17 years old, a girl who should have been tending sheep, a girl who should have been living a simple life, a girl who now carried the destiny of France. She closed her eyes and prayed. "Give me strength, Lord. I am only your servant, but if you wish it, I will continue." And in the quiet stillness of the night, she felt the familiar presence around her, warm, comforting, powerful. A soft voice whispered, "Well done, Joan. The battle has begun, but the journey is far from over." She opened her eyes slowly. Tomorrow, she knew, the war would begin again. Tomorrow, France would need her even more. Tomorrow, her destiny would rise higher than she could imagine. But tonight, France had hope again, and hope is stronger than any sword. The victory at Orléans spread across France like a fresh wind blowing through a suffocating room. Villagers whispered the news with trembling voices. Soldiers repeated the story with awe. Priests lifted their hands in prayer. Everywhere people spoke the same words. The Maid has come. France is rising again. God has not abandoned us. For nearly a century, France had known only sorrow. Cities burned, families scattered, hope faded. But now, a young girl in shining armor had brought light back into their hearts. Joan did not rest long after Orléans. She felt urgency burning inside her like a flame. God had given her a mission, and victory was only the beginning. She prayed each night, asking for guidance. The voices spoke to her again, a familiar warmth, like light in her soul. Go to Reims, the voice told her. Lead the Dauphin to his crown. Reims was a sacred city where French kings were anointed, but it lay deep behind enemy lines, surrounded by English forces and hostile territories. To reach it seemed impossible. Joan rose from her knees and whispered, "If God commands it, then I must go." When she presented her plan to the Dauphin, his eyes widened in fear. "Reims," he repeated softly, "but the English stand between us. Their armies are strong. Their cities are fortified. I cannot reach Reims." Joan stepped closer, her gaze steady. "You can," she whispered, "with God's help." His advisors erupted in protest. "This is madness. We barely won at Orléans. Now she wants to march deeper into danger. Our soldiers are tired. The crown is not secure. She is just a girl." Joan lifted her banner slightly, as if the sight of it alone could silence them. And strangely, it did. The room quieted. "Sire," Joan said, turning to the Dauphin with soft urgency, "you must be crowned. Only then will France know its true king. Only then will God's blessing fall fully upon us." The Dauphin looked down at his hands, hands that trembled. Not with weakness, but with the heavy weight of destiny he had run from. For years, he feared failure. He feared being unworthy. But looking at Joan, he felt something he had not felt since he was a child. He felt called. He nodded slowly. "Then we go to Reims." A murmur of shock filled the court, but Joan bowed deeply, peace settling into her heart. "God will lead us," she said. The march began, through villages still trembling from the war, through woods where English patrols hid, through farmlands scarred by fire. Joan led the Dauphin's army northward. Her white banner fluttered above them, a symbol of purity in a land stained by blood. Cities surrendered to her without resistance. People lined the streets, cheering and weeping as Joan passed by. In some places, entire villages knelt along the road as if she were an angel walking among them. But not everyone rejoiced. French nobles began to fear her growing influence. Clergymen questioned her visions. Generals felt threatened by her authority. Whispers curled like smoke through the camps. "She is too powerful. She makes us look weak. Is she a prophet or something else? What if she leads France into danger?" Joan remained unaware of much of this. She focused only on God's mission. She rose before dawn to pray. She rode at the front of the army. She visited the wounded. She encouraged the fearful. And everywhere she went, people found courage in her presence. One evening, as the army camped in a field, Joan heard a soft sob nearby. She followed the sound and found a young soldier sitting alone, hands covering his face. She approached gently. "Why are you crying?" The boy startled, wiping his eyes quickly. "Forgive me, maid. I fear tomorrow's battle." Joan knelt beside him, her armor glinting in the firelight. "It is not wrong to fear," she said. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It is doing what is right, even when fear is strong." The boy sniffed. "Will we win?" Joan looked to the stars above them. "If we fight with faith, yes." The boy nodded slowly, comforted. The next morning, they won. Victory after victory followed. City after city opened its gates. English forces retreated in disbelief. Everywhere Joan went, the tide of the war shifted. Soldiers called her the Maid of God. Villagers kissed her hands. Mothers begged her to bless their children. The English, terrified, spread dark rumors. They called her a witch. They called her dangerous. They said no girl could lead armies unless she served the devil. But the French believed in her more fiercely every day. Finally, one golden morning, the army stood before the gates of Reims. The great cathedral rose above the city like a crown carved from stone, its stained glass windows shimmering with light. The Dauphin looked at Joan, overwhelmed. Is this truly happening? Joan smiled gently. This is God's will. The people of Reims, eager for peace, opened their gates. The cathedral bells rang joyfully, their sound echoing across the plains. Inside the cathedral, candles bathed the vast hall in warm light. Soldiers lined the pillars. Nobles stood in silence. The air felt thick with the destiny. Joan stood near the altar, holding her banner with reverence. She had fought for this moment. She had bled for this moment. She had walked into fire for this moment. The Dauphin stepped forward, kneeling before the archbishop. Holy oil touched his forehead. The ancient words of blessing filled the cathedral. A crown was lifted and placed upon his head. The new king, Charles VII, rose slowly, tears filling his eyes. France had a crowned king again. The war was not over, but France had been reborn. Joan knelt before him, bowing her head deeply. "My king," she whispered. But Charles reached out and lifted her gently. "Do not kneel to me," he said. "Without you, this crown would not exist." His words filled the hall. Soldiers cheered, bells thundered, nobles shouted her name. "Joan! Joan! Joan!" She stood among them quietly, overwhelmed not by pride, but by gratitude. God had fulfilled his promise. But even as celebration filled the city, shadows formed in the corners of the court. Nobles whispered, "She has too much influence. She threatens our power. What if she gives commands that harm us? What if the king trusts her more than us?" And in England, rage grew stronger. A teenage girl had undone their power. A teenage girl had revived France. A teenage girl had destroyed their pride. They vowed revenge. After the coronation, Joan approached King Charles in a private chamber. She looked restless, troubled. "Sire," she said softly, "the voices tell me we must continue. The English still hold many lands. Paris must be freed." Charles looked uncertain. He had his crown now. He had what he desired. "Joan," he said carefully, "France needs peace." She shook her head. "Peace will not come until England withdraws. We must press forward." Charles hesitated. Without Joan, he had been powerless. With her, he was king. But now, he feared her bold vision. He feared angering the nobles who surrounded him. He feared risking what he had just gained. "We must wait," he said weakly. Joan felt a sting in her heart. "But God—" "Enough," Charles interrupted gently but firmly. "We will rest for now." Joan bowed her head, hiding her disappointment. "Yes, my king." But inside, her spirit ached. She had fulfilled God's command to bring the Dauphin to Reims, but she knew the mission was not complete. France was still wounded, still broken, still trapped under the shadow of English rule. She could not rest. And yet, without the king's support, her path grew uncertain. As the court celebrated long into the night, Joan slipped into the quiet of the cathedral. She knelt before a candlelit altar, her banner laid beside her. "Lord," she whispered, "am I failing? Have I done something wrong? Why does my king doubt me now?" Silence filled the vast space. Then a gentle warmth moved through her heart. "Trust," the voice whispered. "You have done well, but the path ahead will be hard." She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "Give me strength," she whispered, for she felt something shifting around her. Whispers of jealousy, murmurs of fear, shadows of betrayal. But Joan did not fear pain. She did not fear war. Her greatest fear was failing God. And she did not yet know that her greatest trial was coming. Not on the battlefield, but in chains. After the coronation at Reims, Joan felt the joy of victory begin to fade like a candle flickering in the wind. She had fulfilled one part of God's command, but the voices whispered that her mission was not complete. France needed to be fully restored. Paris needed to be freed. English forces still controlled large territories. The people were still suffering. But King Charles VII no longer carried the fire Joan had given him. He had the crown now. He had the ceremony. He had the title. And with those came caution, hesitation, and fear of losing what he had gained. Joan pleaded with him, "Sire, we must advance. God commands that France be free." But Charles looked away, worried. "I cannot risk the kingdom again. We must wait." Nobles stood behind him, whispering, "She pushes too much. She is dangerous to our power. What if the people follow her instead of the king? She must be controlled." And slowly, the king began to listen to them more than to Joan. Still, Joan continued fighting where she could. She joined small campaigns, lifted sieges, gathered troops, and rode wherever God led her. But without full support from the king, her victories became harder. Decisions were delayed, supplies were withheld, and her enemies grew stronger. In the spring of 1430, Joan traveled north to defend the city of Compiègne. English forces and their Burgundian allies were gathering, closing in like a tightening trap. Joan rode into the city determined to protect it. But betrayal lingered in the shadows. On a morning heavy with fog, Joan led a charge to break the enemy lines. Her banner rose above the battlefield, bright and proud. Soldiers followed her bravely, pushing the Burgundians back step by step. But suddenly, the city gates closed behind her. She turned, shocked, as the iron doors slammed shut. Her own French allies had shut her out, leaving her exposed, surrounded by enemies. "Fall back!" her men shouted. "We're cut off!" Retreat made. Joan gripped her sword, refusing to abandon the battlefield. She fought fiercely, her banner held high, her heart burning with faith. But she was alone. Burgundian soldiers closed in. Hands grabbed her banner, pulled her from her horse, tore at her armor. She struggled, kicked, broke free, only to be seized again by stronger hands. "Take her alive!" a commander shouted. "The English want her alive!" Joan fell to the ground, surrounded by enemies. She cried out, not in fear, but in heartbreak. "Jesus! Jesus!" Her voice carried across the field. Then the world went silent. The Burgundians dragged her away in chains. When the English heard she had been captured, they celebrated wildly. Their greatest enemy was not an army. It was a young girl who had destroyed their pride. She had to be punished. She had to be silenced. She had to be removed from history. They paid a huge ransom to the Burgundians to buy her. King Charles did nothing. He did not send gold. He did not send soldiers. He did not negotiate. He did not save the maid who had saved him. Joan waited in her prison cell for months, shivering in the cold, sleeping on straw, chained by both hands and feet. Her guards mocked her. "Where is your God now, witch? Where are your voices? Your king has abandoned you. She looked at them calmly. My king in heaven will not abandon me. The months grew darker. Her clothes were torn, her hair tangled. Food was scarce. She grew thinner, weaker, lonelier. Yet her spirit did not break. Sometimes late at night, she heard the familiar warmth, the gentle whisper she had known since childhood. Be strong, Joan. You have done well. Tears would fall silently down her cheeks. One day, English clerics arrived and informed her she would be put on trial. Not a fair trial, not a just trial, a trial designed to destroy her. She was charged with nearly everything they could invent: heresy, witchcraft, disobedience to the church, wearing men's clothing, claiming to hear divine voices. They attacked her mission, her visions, her purity, her entire purpose. But Joan stood before them, unafraid. The courtroom was cold and crowded with men in robes, judges with hard eyes, scholars who twisted her words. She wore no armor now, only rough clothing and chains around her ankles. Yet she held herself with dignity. A judge asked, "Do you believe you are sent by God?" Joan lifted her chin. "Yes." "Do you believe God prefers France over England?" "I believe God wishes peace," she answered. "Why did you dress as a man?" another judge demanded. "To protect myself," she replied simply. "Would you rather I be harmed in prison?" The judges exchanged frustrated glances. She was not the foolish girl they expected. She answered clearly, wisely, refusing to be trapped by their questions. "Do your voices still speak to you?" they asked. "Yes," she whispered. "What do they say?" "They tell me to be brave." The judges frowned. "You must deny them," they insisted. "Say they were illusions, say they were lies." Joan's eyes filled with tears, but not of fear, of sorrow. "I cannot deny what is true," she said softly. Weeks passed. The trial dragged on. They pressured her, tricked her, starved her, isolated her. But Joan stood strong. Even in chains, she was stronger than her accusers. She became sick from the harsh conditions. Her clothes were soaked. Rats ran across her cell floor at night. She prayed softly in the dark, whispering the names of Jesus, Mary, and the saints. And still, no rescue came, no army, no message from the king she had crowned. France had abandoned its maid. Finally, the judges delivered their verdict: guilty. They condemned her to death by fire. When Joan heard the sentence, she trembled. Death did not scare her, but the manner of it did. Burning, pain, smoke, flames rising around her. Her young heart felt overwhelmed. She fell to her knees. "Lord, give me courage," she whispered. "Do not let me fail you now." On the morning of her execution, guards entered her cell. Joan stood weak but calm. They tied her hands. She looked at them with gentle eyes. "Please, give me a cross," she said. One guard hesitated, then broke a small wooden stick into the shape of a cross and handed it to her. Joan kissed it softly. They led her through the courtyard of Rouen. People gathered, some curious, some sorrowful, some afraid. She looked at them, not with anger, but with love. "I ask only this," she said softly. "Pray for me." At the center of the square stood a tall wooden stake surrounded by piles of straw and wood. Joan walked toward it without hesitation. As they tied her to the post, she whispered prayers under her breath. "Jesus, Jesus, Jesus." Her voice was soft, steady, unbroken. The executioner lit the fire. Flames crackled, rising slowly. Smoke curled upward. A hot wind blew against her legs. Her heartbeat raced, but her eyes remained lifted toward the sky. People began to weep. "A girl, a child, how can they do this?" Joan cried out, not in fear, but in longing. Jesus, Jesus, I am yours. The flames rose higher. Smoke surrounded her. Her voice grew faint, but did not stop. Jesus! A soldier turned away, tears streaming down his cheeks. She's a saint. When the flames finally covered her, the sky seemed to dim. The crowd fell silent. Even her enemies felt a tremor of fear, for in that moment they realized, and they had killed a girl. But they had not killed her truth. The fire burned her body, but it could not touch her purity, her courage, or her faith. When the flames died, the executioner searched among the ashes. He expected to find anger or hatred in what remained. Instead, he whispered, "Her heart, it has not burned." They called it a miracle. And so the Maid of Orléans died at 19, a girl who had carried the future of France on her shoulders, a girl who had led armies with nothing but faith, a girl who had crowned a king, a girl who had given her life for a nation that had chosen fear instead of loyalty. But death was not the end. Years later, the truth of her innocence came to light. Scholars reviewed the trial, priests declared it unjust, kings confessed their shame. The church cleared her name. Centuries later, she was declared a saint, a symbol of courage, faith, purity, and justice. Today, statues of Joan stand in France, in churches, in squares, in hearts. Her white banner, once lifted on bloody battlefields, now symbolizes hope across the world. People remember her not as a victim, but as a warrior of God, a girl who listened to heaven, a girl who refused to fear, a girl who changed history with nothing but faith. Her voice still echoes, "Go forward. Do not fear. God is with you." And so ends Joan of Arc's story, not in flames, not in ashes, but in the hearts of all who believe in courage greater than fear.